right, so let's get right into this deep dive. Because President-elect Trump just made a really interesting move.
Oh, yeah.
Naming his new White House press secretary.
Definitely a headline grabber.
And it's a name you'll want to remember. I think Karoline Leavitt,
Okay.
at only 27 years old,
Wow.
is stepping into a role
Yeah.
that's usually for, like, seasoned veterans, you know?
Right. Usually someone with a lot more years under their belt.
Exactly.
This is fascinating because it really does throw out the old playbook.
Yeah.
It signals a potential shift not just in the administration's communication strategy, but maybe even how we see this role, like, evolving.
Okay. So I'm already intrigued, but before we get ahead of ourselves,
Sure.
let's rewind a bit and get to know Karoline Leavitt a little better.
Yeah. Good idea.
Her story is pretty unique,
It is.
even in the world of politics,
Which is saying something.
which is definitely saying something.
Yeah, she doesn't come from a political family, which is something we see a lot in D.C.
Right.
Born in New Hampshire in 1997, her family ran local businesses, an ice cream shop, and a used truck dealership.
Okay.
No powerful connections, no political dynasties.
So no silver spoon, just a whole lot of drive.
Seems that way.
It's a narrative that could resonate with a lot of people. Right.
Absolutely.
This idea of someone building their own path.
Yeah.
But in the fast-paced world of politics.
Exactly. And her career trajectory really shows that ambition in action.
Okay.
She earned degrees in communications and political science, but she wasn't just hitting the books.
Right.
She was interning at Fox News during college, then working as a news assistant for Fox News Media, and even got experience as an associate producer for New Hampshire Chronicle.
So she was clearly laying the groundwork early on,
Yeah.
getting that hands-on experience in media and politics.
Hmm.
It's almost like she was building her resume with this specific job in mind, even back then.
It's very deliberate, yeah, and then things really took off for her.
Oh, yeah.
She landed a position at the White House during Trump's first term. First as a presidential writer, and then as assistant press secretary under Kayleigh McEnany.
Hold on. So she went from college to the White House in just a few years.
It was fast.
That's incredible.
That's right.
What a meteoric rise.
And her time under McEnany is particularly interesting.
Okay.
McEnany, as you might recall, was known for her very combative style in the press briefing room.
Right.
It's possible Leavitt learned quite a bit about controlling the narrative in a highly partisan environment, you know, about deflecting criticism and really shaping how information is presented.
It's almost like a masterclass in political communication.
Yeah.
But from a very specific perspective.
For sure.
And then she didn't just stay behind the scenes, did she?
No, she didn't.
She ran for Congress.
Yes, in 2022 at the age of 25.
Wow.
She became the youngest Republican Gen Z candidate for Congress. She won the primary, but ultimately lost the general election.
Okay.
But even that loss didn't slow her down. She became the communications director for Rep. Elise Stefanik, gaining more experience and building her network on Capitol Hill.
She's relentless.
Yeah, she is.
And it's clear that she has Trump's trust. After all, she served as his national press secretary throughout this entire campaign.
Which brings us to her style.
Okay.
And this is where things get really interesting.
Right, I'm listening.
Leavitt is known for being assertive, even combative, especially when interacting with the media.
Yeah, I remember that incident where she was cut off on CNN for criticizing their debate moderators.
Oh, that clip went viral.
Like it was everywhere.
It was like watching two completely different approaches to communication just collide.
Yeah.
You had the traditional news anchor trying to maintain control.
Right.
And then Leavitt, who clearly wasn't playing by those rules.
Right, and it felt like she was almost speaking to a different audience altogether.
Yeah, I think you're right.
Like she was playing a different game.
That incident actually reveals a lot about the potential strategic shift we might see.
Okay, how so?
For traditional media, it was a gaffe.
Right.
But for a segment of the population that's increasingly distrustful of mainstream outlets,
Yeah.
it might have signaled authenticity and a willingness to fight back against perceived bias.
So she's not just reacting, she's playing a different game altogether.
Exactly.
And we have to remember, this is a generation that's grown up with social media.
Right.
They understand how to leverage those platforms,
Absolutely.
how to go viral, how to control their own narratives.
That could be a powerful tool for the Trump administration, especially if they're looking to bypass traditional media gatekeepers and speak directly to their base.
Like cutting out the middleman.
Exactly. It was a fascinating preview, wasn't it?
Absolutely. But let's be honest, the White House press secretary job is already like a high wire act,
Oh, yeah.
even without that added layer of combativeness.
Right. You've got to appease the White House, control the message,
Yeah.
and somehow maintain some credibility with the press.
It's a balancing act.
It is.
That requires a really unique skill set. Quick thinking, thick skin.
Yeah.
The ability to stay on message even when you're being bombarded with questions.
From all sides, yeah.
From every angle.
And to do all that while being one of the youngest people to ever hold the position,
Right.
that's a whole other level of pressure.
Some might say it's a recipe for disaster.
It's certainly a gamble.
Yeah.
Seasoned journalists, especially those who've covered multiple administrations, they've seen it all.
Right.
They can spot inexperience from a mile away, and they're not afraid to pounce.
You're right. They can smell a misstep or a hesitation a mile away.
And in today's media environment,
Oh, yeah.
any fumble, any gaffe,
Right.
it can be amplified and weaponized in an instant.
It's a minefield out there.
It is, and
Oh.
that's why her youth and relative inexperience could be a double-edged sword.
Okay, see what you're saying.
On one hand, it could make her more vulnerable to those attacks, to being underestimated or dismissed.
Right. But on the other hand...
But on the other hand, think about it. She represents a new generation of conservative voices, a break from the old guard.
Okay.
And that could be appealing to voters who are tired of the same old political faces and the same old ways of doing things.
So maybe Trump is betting on that freshness, on that outsider appeal.
It's possible.
It's like he's saying we're not playing by the old rules anymore.
And there's also the digital native aspect we discussed earlier.
Right.
Leavitt understands social media, understands how to connect with younger audiences
Yeah.
in a way that many older politicians just don't.
Right.
That could be a real asset in shaping how the administration communicates its message.
Especially in a world where traditional media is kind of losing its grip on the narrative.
Exactly.
It's like she's fluent in a language that a whole segment of the population speaks.
Yeah.
While others are still fumbling with the dictionary.
But let's not forget the other layer to this story.
Okay.
One that adds a whole new dimension to the conversation.
You're talking about her being a new mom, right? I mean, how does someone juggle the demands of a newborn with the pressure cooker of being White House press secretary?
It's a question that so many working parents grapple with.
Yeah.
But the stakes are even higher when you're in such a public and demanding role.
Right. Every decision she makes
Professionally and personally.
is going to be scrutinized and debated.
It's like she's living under a microscope.
With everyone watching and judging.
Some will praise her dedication to her work.
Others will question her choices as a mother.
It's a tightrope walk with no easy answers.
And that's what makes her story so compelling.
It really is.
It's not just about politics. It's about the changing dynamics of work and family.
Yeah.
About the expectations we place on women in positions of power.
You know, I think there's a real opportunity here for Leavitt to redefine what it means to be a working mom.
Okay.
In such a high-profile position.
I like that.
By being open and honest about the challenges, the juggling act, the support system she needs, she could spark a really important conversation.
Absolutely. She could challenge the traditional notions of what success looks like and show other women that it's possible to pursue your ambitions.
Yeah.
Without sacrificing your family life.
But, of course, her political beliefs will play a huge role in how she approaches this job.
Okay, so let's dive into that. We know she's a staunch conservative.
Right.
But what does that mean in practice?
Well, based on her past statements and her campaign platform, we can expect a strong emphasis on limited government, lower taxes, and individual liberty.
Okay.
She's also been vocal about her support for traditional family values and her opposition to what she sees as excessive government regulation.
And we can safely assume she's fully aligned with Trump's America First agenda.
I think that's a safe bet.
So how will that translate to the press briefing room?
We can anticipate a very assertive, even combative defense of Trump's policies.
Regardless of how controversial they might be.
Regardless of how controversial.
So she won't shy away from a fight.
I don't think so.
And she's likely to frame those issues in a way that resonates with Trump's base.
Using language that appeals to their values and concerns.
Exactly. We can also expect a strong critique of media outlets she perceives as biased against Trump or the Republican Party.
Right. Remember her comments about the deep state?
Oh, yeah.
For those unfamiliar with the term,
right?
It's often used to describe a shadowy network within the government
that
supposedly works against elected officials.
So that tells us she's already anticipating opposition and framing it in a way that resonates with a certain audience.
Exactly.
But going back to her style, do you think that kind of combativeness will actually be effective in the long run?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
It is.
Some argue that it alienates potential allies and reinforces negative perceptions of the administration.
Yeah.
Others believe it's a necessary strategy in a media environment where being polite is often equated with weakness.
It's a fascinating dilemma, and one that Leavitt will have to navigate very carefully.
I agree.
But there's another aspect to consider: her personal life, specifically the fact that she's a new mom.
This adds a whole other layer of complexity.
Right.
The demands of motherhood, especially with a newborn, are significant.
And those demands don't just magically disappear
No, they don't.
just because you're in a high-powered position.
Right.
So how do you think she'll manage those competing priorities?
It's a question that many working mothers struggle with, but the spotlight will be even brighter on Leavitt.
Yeah.
Her choices, both personal and professional, will be subject to intense scrutiny.
So will she take maternity leave?
How will she handle childcare?
Right.
These seemingly personal decisions will inevitably be viewed through a political lens.
And in today's hyper-partisan environment, those decisions could easily be weaponized by her opponents.
It's a delicate balancing act, and one that will require a lot of grace and resilience.
Absolutely. But it also presents an opportunity for her to challenge traditional expectations and redefine what it means to be a successful working mother in a high-pressure role.
She could become a role model for other women who are trying to navigate the demands of both family and career.
Showing them that it's possible to have it all, even in the cutthroat world of politics.
It's a powerful message, and one that could resonate far beyond the walls of the White House.
Yeah, it's fascinating to think about the potential ripple effects
Oh, yeah.
of her appointment, both within the administration and in the broader political landscape.
It's like throwing a stone into a pond and watching the circles spread outward.
Right.
So what are some of those ripples we might see?
Well, one of the most immediate impacts will likely be on the White House press briefings themselves.
Okay.
We can probably expect a more combative, less predictable atmosphere.
Yeah, I'm already picturing those clashes with seasoned journalists
Right.
who are used to a certain level of decorum,
Yeah,
a certain way of doing things.
right.
It's going to be a real test of wills.
Absolutely. And it raises questions about how effective that kind of confrontational approach will be in the long run.
Right. Will it alienate potential allies? Will it further erode trust in the media?
These are questions that we'll be grappling with over the next 4 years.
Yeah, it's almost like we're entering uncharted territory in terms of political communication.
And Leavitt seems to be at the forefront of that shift.
She embodies a new generation of conservative leaders
Yeah.
who are comfortable with the spotlight, fluent in the language of social media,
Right.
and unafraid to challenge traditional norms.
It's a generation that understands the power of virality, of bypassing traditional gatekeepers
Right.
and speaking directly to their audience.
And that could have a profound impact on how political messages are crafted and disseminated.
It also raises concerns about the potential for misinformation to spread more easily.
That's a valid point.
When politicians can circumvent traditional media outlets and their fact-checking processes, it becomes more difficult to hold them accountable.
Right, like the Wild West out there.
Yeah.
The rules of engagement are still being written.
But let's circle back to something we touched on earlier, the idea of Leavitt as a potential role model for working mothers.
It's an aspect of her story that I find particularly intriguing by navigating the demands of both motherhood and a high-pressure career. She's challenging traditional expectations and showing other women that it's possible to have both.
And that message could be incredibly empowering, especially for women who feel pressured to choose between their family and their professional ambitions.
Of course, there will always be critics who
Right.
question her choices, who judge her priorities, but ultimately it's her life, her family, and her decision.
And I think that's an important point to remember. We can analyze her actions, speculate about her motivations, but we also need to respect her right to make her own choices.
Absolutely. It's a reminder that even in the world of politics where everything seems to be up for debate,
Right.
there's still a space for personal agency, for individual choices.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, what's
Yeah.
the biggest takeaway?
The most important insight for our listener, I think it's this: Karoline Leavitt's appointment as White House press secretary is more than just a personnel change.
Okay.
It's a symbol of a larger shift in the political landscape,
Yeah.
a shift towards a new generation of leaders, a new style of communication,
Right.
and a new set of challenges and opportunities.
It's a story that's just beginning to unfold, and we'll be watching closely to see where it leads.